another episode of the Smart Dumb Ph.D. Podcast. And Smart Dumb, because by now you know that you need to be the dumbest to be the smartest person in the room. And also, this is a podcast where we discuss about the existential crisis, the genius, the madness that comes with doing a PhD, in addition to covering the stories where people have bridged that gap between academia and industry and how they have done it in a very inspiring and under challenging conditions. Those are all stories that we cover here. And today is a little bit more special for me because I have a person who I have been knowing for years, and her transition story needs to be covered because some transitions are extra challenging, especially if they happen at the peak of the pandemic. Okay, so here is where I introduce Dr. Smrita Chaudhury, and she is a trained scientist who once dissected genes in zebrafish to understand vascular development and now wears multiple hats as a medical manager, as a scientific advisor, a clinical advisor, writer, and a poet. Having known her for years, I can say for sure that she is a great combination of biology, art, data, and of course, empathy, science, and soul. From her early days in clinical research, working on advanced stage ovarian cancer, to her PhD journey. Of course, I couldn't remember all of this, and that's why I had to make this document. PhD journey from Australia, from managing regulatory trials to coordinating patient interviews. Smrita has lived what many professionals may only dream about or think about, the inside story of life sciences in its full spectrum. But what makes a story magnetic is her ability to evolve. She not only thrives in the medical communication space today, but also lends her voice to poetry, as mentioned earlier, and public writing. In a world that demands that we all choose one path, Smrita, I see, is honoring all of them. So if you ever wondered what lies beyond a PhD, or is it too late to pivot, this conversation is your sign to lean in and listen closely. Welcome, Dr. Smrita, and I want you to speak about yourself with this question, which is, your career has transitioned from academia to clinical trials writing and medical communication. Now, before this happened, what was this internal dialogue that you felt going on within you? Is PhD the path for me? Did I do something wrong in the long run? What was that dialogue? Smrita?
Thank you so much, Rima, for a very kind introduction. Well, I think like any other student, or any other professional, we are always in conflict. So even if sometimes we make a decision or we are in the process of making a decision, we often weigh up the pros and cons. And I had no different way either. So I would just like to trace a couple of milestones that led me to where I am today. So I had completed my master's, and at that point, I was because all of my friends were moving into a PhD. I also wanted to move into a PhD. That was the basic, the truth. Because you're always surrounded by your peers, you're surrounded by your professors who see potential in you, and so since your professors are, themselves are PhDs and they've gone abroad and done a postdoc, and they kind of mentor you in a way. So you feel that, okay, maybe I've completed my master's, I'm equipped to move towards a PhD. And initially, I did have a position in India, and unfortunately, because my mother fell ill, and I became a primary to her at that point. So I had to forego my PhD, which was way back, almost like 2011. So then I'm glad I looked after my mother, because in the long run today, your career is important, but your family commitments are equally important. So although I lost the position at Delhi University because I prioritized being a caregiver to my mother, I had to then think, do I want to continue doing my PhD within India? That means apply to these exams, which are very competitive, very limited number of seats, or do I want to go abroad? So again, I decided not to put all the eggs in one basket. And I took the approach that I continued prepping for exams, and I would write all my exams, whatever was possible. But at the same time, I began working in ovarian cancer at the prestigious research center of Tata Memorial Cancer Hospital, situated in Kharghar, which is called in Mumbai, which is called as ACTRAC. And under the mentorship of my professor there, where I worked as a junior research fellow, and I subsequently worked as a senior research fellow in ovarian cancer, helped me gain work experience and also helped me gain a couple of publications, which was pivotal to my to strengthening my application overseas. And so I would write my exams and prepare for GATE and all the other exams possible in India. And also, I was, side by side preparing that if I want to go abroad, I also have a couple of publications which and work experience which can help me strengthen in writing the statement of purpose, which is one of the most important documents when you want to convince someone abroad. And it was a period of 3 years. It wasn't easy. So in this period of 3 years, I would often write to different professors, and it came to a point that I would get the opportunity, but then I would have to find my own scholarship and my own funding. And so most often, I would land up in a situation where the scholarship's not available, or I don't have enough funds to go and do a PhD in a particular country, and that's the reason it kept getting delayed for 3 years. And and I did not lose hope because I just enjoyed what I was doing. I was working very closely with ovarian cancer patients, and the research that I was doing was exploratory. But what really helped me was I was a caregiver to my mother, and in the same field, I became a person who was doing research. So, in a way, I was able to bring my expertise of what I had learned as a caregiver when I would interact with my patients. At the same time, be able to do all of my research in that interface of, with very, very well-known professors and interventional, gynecologists, oncologists, basically. So it so happened that I began to write to more professors. And then I was lucky to be chosen to work at the University of Queensland's Professor Benjamin Hogan's lab. And they worked in zebrafish, and I had no idea how to even work with a zebrafish. But the basics of cancer biology, genetics, that's something that really helped me kind of make the decision that, okay, I don't know the zebrafish model system, but I have basic understanding of genes and genetics. And with that faith, and I took that leap, went to Australia. But what nobody tells you is when you leave your entire life behind in a country that you have lived and grown up, and you've got your support system, and then you move into a place where you have to literally build your support system. Nobody really talks about the vacuum that can occur in your life and how much, as an international student, you have to work so hard, not only to prove yourself professionally, but also to create your own support system around you. And I think those 5 years of my life in Australia, studying and then thereafter progressing towards working in clinical trial management with Novatech in Australia, really helped me grow as an individual. And today I am a lot more equipped to understand that it looks very rosy when you take that leap, but there are a lot of factors that one needs to keep in mind and be aware of or accept it when you're making this transition. And honestly, this transition would not have been um, as as easy as it has been. With of course, it has come with its own challenges. If I did not have the right kind of support when I was making this transition overseas, and it has to begin with my professor, who was extremely supportive, and we I was able to talk about a lot of my scientific ideas with him. And the feedback that I would receive at every lab meeting, sometimes obviously I would come away feeling dejected and was feeling like I've wasted my whole year because, or a whole month, because I would feel like, oh my God, I'm completely in the wrong path or the wrong hypothesis. But that is research, right? And you have to, it's like a pendulum. You're always oscillating between, euphoria and dejection. That's a constant battle. And that's something that most often people don't talk about when they say they encourage people to go towards a PhD, because it's a very lonely path, because you will have to deal with every rejection yourself. You'll have to keep yourself motivated all the time. And to do that, you need a couple of ingredients. One is your professional colleagues, who would be one of the most core ingredient to your success, and also your personal group of acquaintances who are or friends who would genuinely be there for you. And sometimes you do make mistakes. sometimes would cherry pick the not most, let's say, important people for your life. But then that's again a form of learning, and that can happen at any stage of your life. So I think being able to go abroad, face all the challenges, learn to stand on my feet without any support that I was used to or I was familiar with, and then creating my entire support system, and then moving towards clinical trial management. I um, honestly, I never thought there was going to be a COVID. I'm sure nobody did. And then I had come back to India for my sister's wedding, and because of the entire global shutdown for almost, let's say, 2 years, that we really couldn't move much, and that's when I began to think, what do I do with my life? There was this one person who I had met when I was trying to make a transition between academia to industry. And then in Australia, I used to go for a lot of meetups. And that gave me an opportunity to interact with CEOs of different companies and people who are way ahead in the industry. And there was one person who I had met, and I remember being very candid to the CEO. And I said, I know I'm feeling very confused, and I'm not really sure how to make this transition, and should I make this transition? Should I go for a postdoc? And then the person was very kind and very compassionate and said that, Smrita, remember one thing in life, just accept it, that you will always be at crossroads in life. And once you accept that, then you have taken away the expectation of constantly being perfect and perfect in your decisions on yourself. So you're less hard on yourself, right? Because you're only going to make your decisions based on your ability to understand at that point. Maybe 10 years down the line, you would look back and say, oh, I could have done this. But you didn't have that expertise or that know how or that level of depth of understanding. Or even people around you at that point may not have had that level of depth to give you certain feedback that you may have been able to take a decision in a more different way. So I accepted that, and he gave me this beautiful suggestion, which I recommend to anybody who comes to me for any personal or any professional insights. That whenever you come into crossroads in life or for anything, always write up your question and make it very simple. And so for me, my question was, should I make this transition? If so, what sphere should I make this transition towards? So I wrote that simple question on a piece of white paper, and I had broken down 3 columns: yes, maybe, no. So my question was very simple: do I make this transition now, or do I make it 2 years or 3 years down the line? And the answer was yes, I make it, because your heart knows what your brain is trying to rationalize. Because the brain will rationalize based on a lot of your fears that, okay, I don't think I have the skill, or I don't have that money, or I don't have the contacts. These are all the things that the brain is rationalizing. But your heart already knows, yes, I want to move, right? So by doing that simple one question, it narrowed it down. So no was not even an option, right? So once I began with yes, then it came down to, what is it that makes me happy? And I encourage everybody to constantly ask themselves every day, every couple of weeks, maybe, wherever you are, even if you're at a professional space, you're at home, you're a homemaker, whoever you may be, just keep asking yourself, am I happy? Because if you're happy, you can make everybody else around you happy. Your work will be more productive, right? And then my question was, what makes me happy, right? And again, I had these 3 columns of yes, maybe, and no. And I began to ask myself, what kind of work makes me happy? Right? And imagine, for 10 plus years, I have spent my entire life in a research environment. But um, possibly because I was fatigued, and then it got layered with a very bad accident that I had in my final year of my PhD, that impeded my functionality in the lab a little bit, because of a spinal situation that I had, and I couldn't be in the lab working and being hooked onto the microscopes. I couldn't pipe it very much because I would get tremors all the time. And then it was coupled with the fact that I had this deadline to finish my PhD. Otherwise, as an international student in Australia, you have to finish your PhD in 4 years. Otherwise, you don't really have the money to re-enrollment or any of that. You lose your scholarship. So there was a lot of pressure. And when you've gone through an accident and you've not taken a medical break at all, so the fatigue sets in, and you're dealing with chronic pain, and you're constantly on medication and everything. So there were these kind of life situations that made me decide that I cannot carry on in research any longer. Although all throughout my life, I wanted to go for a postdoc to the Netherlands, right? But life always throws you a googly, and the only way to conquer and get control back of your life is riding over that googly every time one comes your way. So when the accident happened, that was the biggest googly for me, because that really pivoted my decision. And then it came to the fact that what do I enjoy? And one thing I really enjoyed was anything to do with clinical trials, clinical communication. That was something that I always enjoyed, understanding, the real translational value of what we are doing. So in a sense, I went back to what I was doing in Bombay, and the 3 years that I spent very closely in a very patient environment. So moment that came into my yes category, then I made a next question. Okay, this is what I want to. This makes me happy. That means anything to do with clinical trials or patients or communication, something. So how do I achieve that? And again, I made a column of yes, maybe, and no. So, what I'm trying to explain is that once you start breaking your every decision into granularity, you become less overwhelmed because you will look for information. And once you look for information and the brain is rationalizing all the time, when you don't have information, the brain freaks out and then you freak out, right? Because the brain is unable to make a rationalized decision. So every time we break things down into small, small questions, small little baby footsteps, it helped me gain clarity. Then I knew what kind of certifications I needed to do so that I get the foot into the door. What kind of networkings did I need to do so that I can use that leverage, that support for myself to get the right inroads into those interviews, or talking to certain people who gave me insights on how to revamp my entire academia based CV to a industry based CV, because the presentation is very different
Yeah, yeah,
between the two. So
yeah.
it's always like this, and that's how I carried on. So this has always been my platform of decision making. And again, with COVID, again being in house arrest, I again had to employ the same strategy. And then it came down to that I love science, I also love writing, and that's how I pivoted towards medical communications, and also as an independent journalist, columnist with the Assam Tribune, where I actually run my own column now on transitioning towards alternative careers.
Right, Smrita, in that one question, you unpacked a lot because those were my follow up questions. Okay, so the first thing I quickly want to ask you, the CEO that you asked for the advice for, was he a PhD? I just want to know that.
Yes.
He is
Yes.
a PhD. Okay. So when he said that you will always have crossroads, no matter how good you are, that reminds me, and the fact that you coupled it with the fact that you should listen to your heart and not try to get into the rational moment at that time, that reminds me of the fact of that Steve Jobs had said this quote that follow your intuition. Somehow they know where you want to go. Okay. So that's like following your intuition. It will seem scary. It will seem really scary, but it will lead you where you belong. And that's actually the story that you narrated is a testament again to this quote. And on that note, I want to ask you that this job that you are right now in, you work with patients, you work with scientists, you work with clinicians, and you work with stakeholders in the pharma communication, right? Now, what is one skill that is required to excel in a job like this that academia didn't emphasize on?
So for the current job profile that I have, I don't have direct contact with patients, but I create material that will at some point downstream will be funneled towards either patient communication or physician communication, or within the pharma or a medical technology oriented company communication. So there are three different, how I would call it three different audiences that I can create communication content towards. I think the one thing that we don't really emphasize when we are in academia, as compared to an industry, is that industry is a very service oriented industry, right? We don't talk about that everything has to translate towards your next business, your next project. If you have a project this quarter, how do you leverage that experience with that client to the next project, maybe in the next 3-4 quarters or next year, right? In academia, you're very focused just on your problem statement, and you're trying to gain collaboration for that problem statement. The problem statement not necessarily will convert into a monetary or a business specific remuneration feedback loop immediately. But in business, it's very important because it's a very service oriented sector. So I think that mindset, that if you're speaking or you're working with this person, you have to constantly keep in mind, will this interaction cascade to your next project or not? That means a lot of times you will have to be very mindful that if you're proposing something for this particular deliverable, um, does it benefit them or not? right? Because if it benefits them, it'll benefit their organization. Then if it benefits their organization, it'll then come back to benefiting you, because they have enjoyed working with you. They know that you've been able to understand their unmet needs and you've catered to their unmet needs, right? So I think that that acumen is not really there for if you're in a very basic academia research. But if you're in, if you're doing research in within a company, and you're doing a PhD within an industry, it's like an industry sponsored or industry based PhD, that skill will come to you automatically. So that business skill is something that is lacking.
Right. On that note, I just want to say that I had a couple of conversations with previous PhDs and also masters who are into research, deep into research, and they had the similar point of view that it's the business skill that is lacking. And that reminds me of one thing, considering my experience at General Electric. Of course, every project that we are doing has to be aligned with the business needs. Having said that, does your current workspace or the sector that you're working in allow you to contribute a bit of your time to whatever is the technology that's coming 10 years down the line? Because there may be disruptions, right, of what you're doing right now, and there can be sudden disruptions. Okay. So, is there any fundamental research that you can contribute your time to? And I'll give you one example. So, 3M's product, which is Post-it, which is one of its most hit product, was the result of this fundamental research. Okay, that didn't have any business impact initially, and they didn't know how to convert it into a business solution. But then it eventually translated into this revenue generating product, and it's a Post-it is a thing that we all love, right? So in that context, I'm coming from there, and this was the question, like, do you also look into technologies that are going to come down the future, which you don't know how to assess their business implication right away, but you know it might impact it in the long run?
So that's a good question, because right now the push to in the workforce is to become a super worker, which which basically means that you are allowing artificial intelligence to actually do a lot of the legwork that you would have otherwise spent working on, as opposed to now, because the mindset shift is that every person who's in the workforce should be a super worker. That means a lot of legwork, allow AI apps to do it, and then you can look at how to be focused more on strategic planning, strategizing it, right? So there are a couple of, and each company is trying to get onto the bandwagon of coming up with AI apps or AI, utilizing AI to improvise their work. And so there are a couple of things in the pipeline which I won't be able to disclose right now. But because in by 2030, the idea is that each of us will have to become a super worker, and the time for any task we would have taken maybe 4 hours should be brought down, let's say, to an hour or 30 minutes. And I think in the next couple of years, every company will come up with their own innovations that will contribute to the sector in general.
Okay, I'm hearing that term for the first time. Thank you for bringing up that term, super worker. That sounds fun. That sounds challenging as well. So that's where the mix is. It's pushing you to be better, faster, and efficient as well, right? So on that note, I'm shifting gears and I'm coming back to the question. Because the transition again is not a straightforward path, right? So, what are some of the underrated opportunities in the healthcare or pharma sector that PhDs who are pursuing their PhD in life sciences or biosciences that they aren't aware of, or they have are firstly not at all aware of, or they have a misunderstanding about it? They are not really aware what it is, but also they carry a misunderstanding. Okay, this might not be the right path for them. So, can you enlighten us over there, Sweta?
So a lot of times that we feel is, when even for me, when I was looking at what are the transferable skills do I have when I was working on my PhD, and often I would come across job descriptions like project management, project consultations, or let's say consultants per se, right? Or let's say, for example, if it's anything related to pharma related or medical technology device related, right? When we look at the job description, often we would be in we would self-evaluate and self-critique us that, oh, I don't have these soft skills or transferable skills. I think that's the biggest disservice we do to ourselves. And most often in academia, people don't really talk about this, right? Because transitioning away from academia, there's always a very subtle sentiment that I wouldn't call it negative, but there's a subtle sentiment that, oh, you're transitioning, right? And we've come a long way. It's been like almost, let's say, a decade now, where the transition is the word now, right? And it's a much better space to be transitioning because everybody's talking about it. I think there's even a Nature article, if I remember correctly, where they said that almost there was almost like a two-figure percentage, I think 30 or 40%, where people are doing their PhD but they want to transition out of academia because academia has a lot of bottleneck, and there's a lot of revamping that needs to be done in academia for people to sustain financially, to survive in a career that is very demanding as well. And there is very less financial security because you may have a grant today, not necessarily you'll have a grant tomorrow. And if you don't have these grants, then how do you, if you have a lab, how do you pay for all your let's say your colleagues who are working with you in, or things like that. So the way I look at it is, we don't talk about transferable skills. And I think that is important because life can throw you googlies at any point. Like I got the googly in such a way that I had the accident. And then I had to pivot. And I was like, I had 8 months to think, what do I want to do? And that pressure is a lot. In 8 months, I had to decide, where do I go? What do I do? Which sector do I move towards? So at that point, not only was I performing my experiments, writing my thesis, writing my paper, figuring out where, which are the kind of certifications I have to do, study for those certifications, pass them, and achieve those grades I need, then make your CV. So I think right from your first year, if there's an atmosphere where the student is made aware that if you're doing 3 different or 5 different projects, you have project management skills. If you're collaborating with 2 or 3 people, you have the ability to manage stakeholders. That is the transferable connotation in industry, right? So that link is often missing, and often students feel lost, and they feel that they're ill-equipped, as opposed to somebody who's done a master's, has immediately started working, and they would feel a lot more confident because at a very young age, maybe at the age of 22 or 23, they've already gotten themselves into an ecosystem which talks about these things. So imagine a person who has got a PhD, is resilient. That's the biggest trait a PhD holder will always have, to triumph under any cost, right? And only the conversation, if it's pivoted a little bit, that these are the kind of transferable skills. These are your stakeholder management skills. These are your interpersonal skills. So what happens? This person is a lot more aware and less intimidated when they want to make a transition.
Exactly. So you spoke about mindset, and I understand that part because when I was working with PhDs, and when they are going through the job descriptions, they have that similar washed out face expression. I don't have any of the job experiences. I don't have these skills, and like, you have it. You just have to look at it in a different way and flip that conversation in your head, that this is how you have been having project management skills. This is how you have been having consultation skills. So circling back to my question, which was, what are the opportunities available in the pharma company that PhDs aren't aware? So in your case, were you aware that you had this medical manager option, medical communication option, clinical trials, scientific liaison officer? How aware were you of these positions?
Honestly, when I began until I seriously thought about transitioning way back, when I was transitioning into clinical trial management, I didn't know. It was only when I started looking at it that, okay, I have to move out of academia. That's when I began to make this entire big Excel sheet of all the different job profile or job names, I would call them, right? So if somebody has a PhD and they enjoy coupling it up with being on site, talking about the product, being the face of the company for that particular product with the doctors on site. Well, I didn't know there was a role called medical science liaison, right? Or if you like your science and you enjoy creating, whether it's a short format that is in the form of slide decks or posters, small little abstracts, or let's say even a leave behind leaflets, right? Or if you like writing long format publications and delving into a lot of complex data, right? You can think about a career as in let's say medical writing, right? Medical writing can be 2 types: a very clinical oriented, you can write your protocols for a clinical trial, that, or you can write a CSR. That is one form of medical writing. Another form of it is like when you're actually making content that can be a small little bite-sized, right? That can be a form of communications. So there are so many different designations. And the way I always think is today, when somebody comes and asks me, how do I make these transition? I first ask them, are you aware of the job names? Because once you're aware of the job names, then you look at their job descriptions. And then you start seeing what is your actual inclination towards.
I am so totally with you over there. That's exactly what we go through when we start working with somebody. When I start working with somebody, it's a job description you need to start with. Read it very, very, very carefully with utmost focus and understand the tasks involved so that you know, like, do you like these tasks or do you don't like these tasks? Again, any job, be it any job, there will be a dominant set of tasks that you might like, and there will always be a set of tasks that you might not like. You can confirm that further, but those set of tasks that you don't like will always be there. Only thing that you need to look for is the dominant set of tasks. Are they the ones that you are liking? Then you should go for that job. Smrita, do you want to confirm that?
Absolutely. And a lot of times what happens is your interpretation of those tasks may not be 100%. You
Thank you
might.
so much for adding that point. Yeah, please go
Yes.
ahead. Yeah.
So I was in a situation where I I was at a particular, it was, without divulging too much of it, just a couple of dominant tasks. But when I actually got into it, I realized that the dominant tasks were not as straight and simple. So a lot of times what happens is you look at the job description. If there is any point in that job description you don't understand, or a particular, within once you've got into an organization, if there is a project, if you don't understand the dominant task or even an allied task, I think it's important to really shred it down and really understand it. Because if you don't shred it down, it impacts your efficiency and also impacts your ability to then come across as someone who can deliver the project as well, or that particular, do justice to that particular position or that particular project that you're working on.
And Smrita, on that note, I'm shifting gears a little bit towards hiring, okay? Because now you are also hiring for the role that you work for. What happens with me? I'll give you one example. So, one person that I was working with wanted to apply for a technical writer role, okay? And their resume starts with their name, their education, the institute that they passed out from. Sometimes they're also having a photo, and then it talks about the PhD work that they have done. And somewhere towards the end, there comes a list of publications that they had had. And when we got talking, that's where I realized this person had secured grants worth of 10 lakh. Okay, and this person had patents, right? Now, these were things that I believe is something that elevates your credentials when you're applying for a technical writer role, and that's not even present in your resume in a way that a hiring manager or recruiter can see. So, can you elaborate on that point, how important it is to have the relevant skills on the resume, which actually makes the hiring manager believe, okay, this is the person I can go for. Go ahead.
I absolutely agree. There's been I've been literally, I've been in a situation of CV screening for a particular position in house right now, and I have seen different formats of CVs. And sometimes I often feel that it's an academia CV just taken and just put into the system and they were applying to us, right? And there's a lot of inconsistencies as well. So obviously, I think one needs to understand that when the person is looking at the CV, right? I have 200 plus CV sitting on my table, right? And I can spend not more than 5 minutes, right, to just look through everything quickly, look, and I'm looking for keywords. So my approach would be that have a very designate 2 or 3 bullet points of who you wish to be projected as to your potential hiring manager or whoever's screening. I'm not even saying hiring manager. I'm saying somebody who's just doing a preliminary screen just to see whether you cut the mark or not. And a lot of times what happens is you look at your job description you're applying towards, use those keywords. If you are, like, for example, if somebody is applying for a medical writer role and the person has a very core research scientist career, you know, and you just send me a research scientist career, your entire CV, which is very tailored to a research scientist position. And then if you just send it to me, I'm looking for certain certifications. Not necessarily you will have all of them, maybe one, right? Or none, doesn't matter. Relevant work experience. So what happens is there's a disconnect when they look at the JD. They think that, yes, I have done all of this, but that has to be reflected in words, in quantifications. So let's say I have reviewed 29 manuscripts, right? If it's an editorial position, or if you'd say medical writer position, I have done XYZ number of slide deck preparations. I have experience in writing XYZ number of publications in these therapy areas like rare diseases, oncology. You don't have to go into depth, right? But every time I feel there's a disconnect, automatically the person who's even doing the CV screen will not spend more than a minute after that. So I think within the first, and people should pivot their CV structure, right? The old format was you will have all your percentage, and you've got to have you achieved in class grade 10, your grade 12, and nobody talks about your academic percentages. Everybody now looks at what skills are you bringing to the table. And now with the whole pivot of thought that we have to become super workers, what AI softwares for that job description are you aware? Like, I'll give a very simple example. For my work, let's say if I do extensive amount of literature review. I do extensive amount of looking for papers and publications. Research Rabbit is a skill. It's an AI skill, right? And there are many different types of AI softwares that can do the same particular let's say, for example, for literature review mapping, right? Or if you want to know that if you have a long publication and you have 10 minutes to pull out exactly what is being talked in that paper, right? So you've got AI apps such as like Chat PDF, or the Google, I think, it's called, I think, the Google Network something LM. I forget the whole notebook LM is one thing, right? Or you've got the Google AI Studio. So having now, I feel in CVs there should be one thing about AI expertise, which will actually show that for literature review, I know this app. For extracting information out in a very short time from a publication, I know this. You don't need to know everything, but at least think about the core skills that are there in that job description. That will be part of your bread and butter for that position. What AI app do you know? Moment you start putting it there, it becomes easy. Like, for example, for an IT engineer, they will always have words like Python, R. These will be there because that is the base for them to become efficient. So I think a lot of CV restructuring is important.
I totally agree with you, the CV restructuring, the format, because again, sometimes maybe even if you haven't read through the resume, but the moment you look at it, you might know that, okay, this is the right one because the format feels right. The structure, the bulleting all feels neat because the format, the structure, the bulleting, all of that guide your eyes in ways that we subconsciously don't understand, but it does, right? And we covered this resume aspect, and all of that you spoke about are things that always helps a hiring manager to make the decision faster, especially when they are so tight on their time. It makes it very easy for them to pick up the candidate, right, Smrita? So on that note, I again want to ask you this question, which I've been asking again and again every hiring manager. How much importance do you give to a referral? How important is it for your industry?
Referrals are important anyway, right? Because what happens when you have someone within the organization, not necessarily that it is a friend of yours or an ex-colleague of yours, you can develop that relationship over LinkedIn. Talking to that person, asking for informational interview, a small little slot of 15 minutes or 20 minutes. You're just building a relationship, a work relationship. That just gets you the foot into the door, but it does not give you the security that yes, you will get the job, right? Because and every workplace has the culture of referral, right? It's known everywhere. Every sector has it. So you can get, like, I think there has been situations that somebody has approached me on LinkedIn. Not necessarily the person knows me or I know the person personally, but the person's approached and we've discussed. The person has also asked for time for informational interview and all of that. And then they share the CV across, right? And I do put it into the common pool of CVs. But there is an internal committee as well who will look at that CV, right? And only if they feel that yes, it caters, or it's important that we can at least have a discussion, maybe a first discussion or a telephonic screening. It just becomes whether you are in the right place at the right time with the right people who are looking at it. Because somebody might look at it and say, oh, but we don't have vacancy. And then the vacancy may come after 2 years or 1 year, but you've already got another position somewhere else, right? So I think that it's good to build working relationship with people when you are applying to an organization, for sure. But it is not a sure shot guarantee that you will get your next step in that interview process.
I'm thankful that you are breaking it down that it's not a sure shot guarantee, for sure it's not, but it increases your probability at least to step into the interview room. And the more you are getting that opportunity to be in the interview rooms, I believe the more closer you are to cracking that offer, right? So again, I'm going to be shifting gears now that you are more in a leadership position, right? You've moved from that, the technicalities of the role which required you to be more technically adept. You've moved into a leadership role where you're also managing people along with you, and you're also mentoring them, right? So now, what is the thing that's going on in your head? Like, what are the factors that make you successful at work over a period of time? How much of it can be credited to your technical skills, and how much of you want to credit it to the soft skills? Can you break it down for us? And if you have any
So,
relevant story or anecdote that you can think of from your career, please feel free to share that as well.
sure. So at the moment, we've definitely, like within the organization, we've had a lot of different reject that has happened and everything. So for me, my current role is such that I do my executions, independent execution of each project, and I also mentor the younger colleagues to help them become their best when they are delivering and when they are interacting with the stakeholders, who are very important to us. I think in terms of soft skill, and I always look at it that I have obviously a long way to go, and to make myself and establish myself as a more strong leader in the sector that I am in. But one of the most important soft skills that I feel is to be able to lead with compassion. You cannot break down somebody and expect them to be at their efficient best. If you are not speaking to them, if they've made the biggest mistake in that particular deliverable, or it's been a complete oversight. But if you're not compassionate in conveying that to them and just breaking down and stripping them of their confidence, that person is never going to be able to work at their best, because a demoralized person is best that they will decide they want to leave. So that's one thing I've realized, and I've seen different forms of leadership as well. I think there are two things. Buck stops on my table instills confidence to somebody below the chain, that if I make a mistake, if I go and be honest with this person, yes, the person may get upset within that four walls of the meeting room, but then it becomes okay. What's the contingency? Demonstrating that buck stops on my table instills confidence of your team, and also it helps you push your boundary to become a leader who is able to be increase their resilience. Also, it's much easier to just kind of deflect the blame to somebody who's younger to you, that, oh, I didn't see this slide deck, or I did not know this, I told the person to do it, the person didn't do it. But at the end of the day, buck stops on your table, right? And I think that has helped me, in my point of view, be able to instill that confidence in somebody who's younger to me. Because often I would get feedback, a word of mouth or just a stray sentence saying that, so that it's a pleasure working with you, right? Because when they go astray or something happens, immediately take charge of things, convince them. And from the stakeholders' point of view also, mistakes happen, right? Being able to own up to those mistakes and saying that, actively making sure it never happens again. So it also instills a confidence of your external stakeholder as well. So I think these are the two things I often feel. And if for anything in life, I think it comes down to what I call it as a CIC formula, which I, in my opinion, it is courage, integrity, compassion.
I
Because
Yeah.
because it doesn't matter whether you are a homemaker, whether you are an educator, whether you are, let's say, a CEO of a company. But for anything to be successful, for yourself to be successful, if you don't have the courage to say buck stops on my table, or you don't have the courage to say, I disagree with this policy because it's going to boomerang two steps, three steps down the line, it takes courage, right? Integrity. Whatever work comes your way, whatever you have any form of interaction, whether it's somebody at your leadership position, somebody in your team, if you don't have the integrity to that in that particular point, in that particular conversation, then it really cascades into a lot of things negative down the line. And more importantly, compassion. Because I can make a mistake, and be compassionate towards myself. Oh my God, I didn't think of it. Okay, I will make sure it doesn't happen tomorrow. Right? Having the compassion that you've seen somebody else make a horrible decision, but having the compassion to be like, okay, we've made this horrible decision. What do we do next? It's very easy to scapegoat, because when you're scapegoating, you're taking yourself out of the equation, whereas you may be one of the most prime decision makers to that situation that has gone completely astray. So I call it the CIC formula. And I think it's important for me, at least personally, that even if out of 10 things I do in a day, if I can express it in two things over the years, I'm sure that this trait will only increase and become better, and doesn't come in one day. And these are traits you cannot buy with money.
Absolutely. And that's why I mentioned right at the beginning of this podcast that epitome of empathy. Okay. And people get empathy very wrongly. And the example that you gave over here, where you are being empathetic to a person who might not have performed to the expectations of you, but at the same time, you are not trying to make them, that, hey, it's okay. No, you're trying to point out, see, this is what you could have done better, and you're giving them that space to do the mistake and then improve on it, right? So that's a space, most of us, when we are given that space, we tend to improve. That's what research has shown too. But if you don't give that space, and at the very first moment you're like pointing out and scapegoating, you are the one responsible, then things don't work out. I personally had those mentors in my life, I had those managers, and I know for sure how much of a difference that makes. And I know how challenging it is for such leaders to exist, because most of the time leaders are towards scapegoating, because that's easy, that's convenient. But whatever is easy and convenient is not necessarily always the right way. And I'm glad that we took up this thing about compassion and empathy. Don't get to speak about it. I'm glad that you raised these words, and the fact that you spoke about CIC, which is like courage, integrity, and compassion. I believe these are your values, Smrita, right? And these are something that you live by, whether it's career, whether it's life. It applies to both. So I believe those are also one thing that, if you identify those values for yourself, it helps you to make decisions in such complex scenarios, where you don't know whether you should take the blame or you should pass it on. Should you make the buck stop at your table, or should you pass the buck, right? So if you ask yourself, if courage is my value, then I would ask myself, okay, should I take responsibility for that? Yes, it requires courage, I'll take responsibility, right? So wonderful, wonderful. I love that. And I know there's a lot more that we can discuss about, but then I want to conclude this whole conversation with two last questions. One is, how does success look to you right now? Like when you started your career, or maybe go back to when you started your PhD versus now. It's almost been more than 10 years, right? More than almost 15 years. Correct me if I'm wrong. So, what does success look like to Smrita right now?
Um, okay, I think success, the definition changes every 6 months, and that is a rude reality, right? Because what happens is that and I think it's not just about success post PhD. I think success can be even post bachelor's, can be a bit post masters, right? Because what happens is that when I look at it today, when I for me, my spectrum of success is, how do I become a super worker? That's my definition of success now, which was not my definition, let's say 2024, the same April 2024. Because if we have to sustain and make sure that we find ourselves to, I call it, there are terms like make yourself recession proof, make your company recession proof. Those are things we would often hear. Now it's becoming make yourself and make your company AI proof. Because if you proof yourself, then you might, like, I came across this beautiful article where Bill Gates is advocating that maybe in a couple of years, humans will need to work only for 2 days. That's frightening, right? So are you in that cut of work, being considered to work for even those 2 days?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. Even Reid Hoffman, the owner of LinkedIn, has validated this, that starting 2034, that's the year he mentioned, though I may be wrong about the year, 9 to 5 jobs would no more exist. Yes, continue. I just wanted to add that pointer to that.
So now my definition of success is, how do I make myself as a super worker? And that is what will define success, that will actually define whether I survive in the workforce. And if I survive in the workforce, then I can talk about the next milestone of success.
Love that, because yes, we are evolving, and you being the biosciences expert here, every cell in our body is changing every day, and that has to also reflect in the way we think. And of course, with the AI revolution happening, things changing much, much faster at a pace like unprecedented. I think I would agree with you with the fact that the definition of success in terms of career might keep changing over a period of time, over 6 months again. And on that note, my last question to you, Smrita, is say if you were in a room of PhDs, room full of PhDs today, and you had to give them one piece of advice, what would that be?
Identify what makes you happy. And that's the first step to achieving success. That's taken me a long time to pivot towards. And I came across this beautiful thought that the longer you are in a situation where you are unhappy, the longer you are denying yourself of the happiness you truly deserve. So if you're unhappy at a work, at a relationship, or at a place you are in at life, assess, find out ways to mitigate, be vocal about your unhappiness to the right quarters where you think it may help you alleviate your state of mind. And if it does not, find alternatives. But denying yourself that happiness to be your 100% is a tremendous injustice that you are doing to yourself. And you alone can change that, nobody else.
And I want you to further justify it, like break it down a little bit more, because many a times people think that identify what makes you happy will be something like, oh my God, I found it in one over a period of a night or something, over a period of 2 weeks or something. It might not be so. It might take you months. It might sometimes take you a year or more, but it's okay to take that time to get into a space which makes you happy. What do you feel about that, Smrita?
I absolutely agree. Like, I just go back to when I was making my first industry transition from PhD to working in clinical trial management. And the reason I was unhappy was contributed through the accident that happened to me, right? And that really impeded my functionality per se. So imagine if I didn't have the courage, right? To just be honest with myself that I cannot pipe it for very long. I cannot be hooked on the microscope for too long. I cannot be doing dissections that can take me not just in 5 minutes, it takes me time to do maybe an hour, 2 hours, and I can't. If I just didn't have the courage to be honest with myself, and if I would have taken the path that, okay, research is what I've been doing all these years, so let me just carry on, and then battling my health issue, and then I'm just constantly cascading more and more unhappiness towards myself, as opposed to just sitting down and just being brutally honest that I can't do this anymore in my life. And then really working hard in getting all the ingredients that are needed that can help me come out of my comfort zone. It was not easy to leave research and find what can I do next, and kind of ace myself in the corporate world, because corporate world is very different as well, right? And I have a very, very long way to go. But I think just pushing yourself out of that comfort zone is most important. And one thing that I came across, this beautiful little clip of a fish, I'd say like a huge fish, and there's a pyramid of water that the fish is just swimming around, and there is this space of no water,
Mm-hmm.
only just the shore.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's this expanse of water that is the
Mm-hmm.
ocean.
Yeah.
And that beautiful video showed that this huge fish that was inside that little pyramid of water had the courage to
Jump
go
over.
through the space of no water, which is very, very difficult. That is the space between your comfort zone and your next possibility. And
Mm-hmm.
once the fish was able to scale through, hurting itself, but
Mm-hmm.
once it gets into that big ocean, there's no limit.
Yeah,
So
true.
every time we feel dejected, upset, whether it's at work, anywhere, ask yourself: if I'm unhappy, am I unhappy for today? Is it been a week, or is it been months, or is it a year? Because that will sometimes, like, what happens is we are in the eye of the whirlpool and we feel like everything is jumping onto us, right? And then at night, sometimes I'll just go back and ask myself: is it a bad year? No. Is it a bad month? No. Is it a bad week? No. Is it a bad day? Yes. So
Absolutely.
once it's a bad day and you've just said it's just one day and tomorrow's going to be better,
Yeah.
right? Then it makes sense. But if it's been chronic weeks of bad days, then you need to ask yourself, what can I do to make my situation better? And that's often when people start, walking away from organizations, walking away from their life situation to make it better. Because at the end of the day, everybody's life, purpose of life is different.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's beautiful. The day, months, and years perspective that you spoke about is like having that wholesome perspective, because as you said, when we are in the eye of the storm, everything feels like it's falling on us, but that's not true. That's just been a bad day. But when you keep asking these questions, was it a year, was it a month, was it a day, it gives you that perspective. No, it was just a day. You bring your awareness back to that fact, right? And the process of transition that you explained is, I believe, a lot of deconstruction and reconstruction. And we will come back to your favorite word, and that's my favorite too. It's courage. It is courage that you have to step into that position where you have to reconstruct yourself, and before that you have to deconstruct yourself, right, Smrita? It was a wonderful, wonderful conversation, Smrita. And I keep saying to all my speakers, because all of them carry a lot of wisdom through the PhD years that they have been, the transition that they have made, that it's not possible for me to cover their entire journey in this 1 hour podcast. And therefore, I need you back. How, when, I don't know. But of course, I need you back. And it's been awesome conversation with you, and I'm sure the listeners are going to have some great takeaways and notes that they'll carry with themselves to inspire them, and also ask them some questions that help them pivot to identify roles that make them happy. Thank you, Smita.
Thank you, Rima, and for inviting me to your podcast. And I also wish you tremendous success through this venture of bringing stories from around the globe and hopefully inspiring another person or a group of people to have the courage to make transitions when they feel most important in their life.